So I've managed to gather 4-ish stories today that I'm going to read to you, and I hope you enjoy these. Before we begin, I just want to say a huge thank you to the subscribers who have shared their experiences with me and with us, all of us on the channel. But now, with that being said, and without further ado, let's get into tonight's stories, shall we? Alright, so the first 2 stories were sent to me by a subscriber is just generally considerate and eager to help, like I said. But instead of just grabbing the things and coming outside, he stood right inside the door and told my mum to just come into the house. She said that it was imperative that he get out right now, and that something bad was going to happen if we went or if he stayed inside. He just kept telling her to come inside over and over and over again. Long story short, my mum absolutely refused to go inside. I believe that the voice she heard was a guardian angel or something, and it saved us from something very dangerous. Now, what strikes me as really strange in this story is that the dad, who is described as this really awesome guy who is thoughtful and helpful and considerate, that he refused to come outside when her mum clearly was panicked and said it was imperative that he come outside. It makes me wonder whether, this evil presence, whatever you want to call it, that the guardian angel wanted to protect them from, was already, possessing or having some kind of power over the dad in some way. Because, reading this story, it was clear to me that behaviour wasn't typical for a dad to display. I'm glad that her mum stood her ground though, because, I don't think anything good would have happened if they had gone inside, especially with the father acting so strange. There is also another story that Wandering Bell ASMR has shared with us, and this story is called She Heard the Ghosts of Marching Soldiers. This story did not actually happen to me, but to a relative of mine who I'm very close with, and she told me about this experience. For the sake of the story, we will call her Sarah. When Sarah was young, about 6 or 7, I believe, she had a very hard time sleeping. But it wasn't for any normal reason a child might struggle with bedtime. Many nights, Sarah would hear the sound of very loud and distinct marching coming up the driveway. For context, she lived in a house with a very long gravel driveway, about a quarter-mile long. She would cover her ears and try to drown out the noise, but she could always hear it coming closer and closer down the driveway. She was convinced that whatever or whoever it was coming to kill her and her family. Several nights she cried and told her mum about the marching, but her mum couldn't hear a thing and just kept telling her that she was imagining it. However, Sarah's house or soldiers revisiting the site of their death. I feel so bad for Sarah because as a child, and throughout my life actually, I've had sleeping problems, and it was always because of nightmares. I have chronic nightmares, and as a child they used to be recurring nightmares, but I can't imagine how hard it must be to not be able to sleep because of something that firstly you can hear when you're awake, and secondly it's something that only you can hear, and your mum and your dad don't believe you. I can't imagine how hard that must be. Obviously, because I make these videos for you guys, I read a lot of stories on Reddit, and what has become apparent to me and is particularly striking is that areas where there have been, battles, specific war-related events that have happened, where a lot of people have died at once, they always seem to be the subject of paranormal activity much more than, say, people's houses or something like that. You read a lot of Native American burial sites as well that are really, plagued by paranormal activity. So, if your house happens to be near one of those sites, well, I guess it's to be expected that you experience at least some form of paranormal activity. Thank you so much, Wandering Bell ASMR, for sharing your stories with us on the channel. The next story was sent to me by a subscriber called Riley. Their story is called First Time Telling This Story in 14 Years. When I was 18 years old, I used to babysit my 3-year-old niece at my sister's house. This house used to be mine and our parents' house, but we swapped houses in the end. One night, at around 8 p.m, my sister had already been out for about half an hour, and I was giving my 3-year-old niece a bath. Her friend Samantha, who was also 3, was sitting niece's pajamas laying on the floor. I grabbed my niece and Samantha and I ran downstairs as fast as I could. I made them stand on the outside doorstep while I knocked on my neighbour's house, saying someone has just come into the house. Now the worst thing was that the neighbour, she didn't believe me and she didn't come in and check, so I thought, it. I took the kids back inside the house and noticed the hall light above the stairs was off. I said to the kids, "Did any of you turn that light off? And I won't be angry if you did." And they said, "No, we can't even reach the light switch." You would think that that would be the last time that I ever went into that house. But no. I babysat one night again, and everything was fine until about 4 a.m. My bedroom door flung open with such sheer force that it woke me up. I thought it was my sister trying to play tricks on me, trying to prank me, so I got angry and I looked, but no one was there. I got up out of bed and went into the hallway, and I noticed my sister's bedroom door was just closed, as was my niece's door. The next morning, I asked her whether she had opened my bedroom door last night, and she said, "Why the hell would I do that at 4 in the morning?" I hated that house. I was pushed out of bed twice and woken up another time to a mouse crawling up my arm. The house has the strangest vibe, and especially up the stairwell. I remember asking my dad whether there was anywhere in the house that made him feel like he was being watched, and he specifically said the stairs. Thankfully, my sister moved, so I never had to go back to that hell house again, but it has terrified me for years. I can definitely imagine that this would be such a traumatizing experience to live through, especially when you're only 18 and you're babysitting 2 3-year-olds. That is already such a huge responsibility, and then I can imagine that when anything goes wrong, you start blaming yourself and doubting yourself. I do find it rather rude though that the neighbour woman didn't believe what she was saying and didn't even come out to check. As if, an intruder entering the house is such a daft thing to say, like, as if that doesn't happen all the time. I don't get it. Very rude. I'm glad that Riley's sister moved out of that house in the end and she never had to revisit it. Sometimes a house can just feel inherently bad, and then it's just best to never set foot in there again. But as we heard in the first story that Wandering Bell shared with us, that's not always an option. Thank you so much, Riley, for sharing your story is one more really short story that I want to share with you guys. It has been posted in my comment section and it just blew my mind. So, this short story was posted in the comments by that stuff.